Well, welcome, Matthias. Very glad to have you here today. And this is our first session. I think one of the things we should do today as we start is for us to revisit a couple of important notions. One is what has brought you here to this point here to this conversation with me. And the second would be to ask you what you are seeking or what you're looking for as a way forward or as a resolution of whatever problems you are encountering at this moment. So I'd love to hear about what's brought you here and about what you're looking forward to.
Well, what's brought me here is yeah, it's a question about myself, my functioning. So the question is, why is it so important for me to understand things? So what I'm looking for here is, I guess, yeah, some insight, some understanding into my own functioning. Why it is such a strong, we can call it desire in me.
What do you take as what is your understanding of why you think you have such a strong desire or such a strong urge to understand? What do you take as what kinds of behavior do you display? What kinds of, evidence do you have that you have this desire to understand?
Well, let's say the evidence I have for it is that when I encounter something that I find a bit interesting, I it's difficult to just let it go. I want to check it out. I want to read up on it
Hmm.
and see yeah, the history behind it, how it works, you know, really dig into the subject. Not
Right.
any subject, of course, but anything that somehow piques my interest. It's hard to just leave it as it is. So I want to understand it.
Right. And this understanding is not just, for example, to academic matters. It extend to people? For example, are you fascinated by people's behavior and you wish to know more about them? So does it lead to those kinds of interactions as well?
People's behavior, yes.
Right.
If it can be emotions, why do people have certain emotions? Why do we have emotions? So I would say it's not just intellectual matters.
Right. Right. And would you say this curiosity of yours has, driven you in the sense that has it led you to make choices like, for example, university education or the profession you've chosen or the kinds of partners you might have found in life? Would you say that this has also been influenced by
It,
this
it
desire?
has, yes, particularly concerning my studies, my university studies.
Hmm.
I'd say I've studied more than I need to really because uh, right as we speak, I'm taking a university course because it interests me.
Right. So this desire, I mean, the fact that you are here talking about it, right, means that it strikes you as something. I wonder if perplexity is the right word or problem is the right word or something that strikes you as a feature of your life that has been an ever-present feature in the way that you described it, that has driven your life. So you wouldn't describe it as a problem for you. You're not, for example, in the case of someone who's saying to me, why do I drink so much? Because I find myself in the gutter every day outside bars, right? You're not having negative, as it were, occurrences in your life driven by this desire of yours,
No, I wouldn't say that it causes me any problems. No,
right?
no. So yeah, more a perplexity than
More a perplexity as to why you are this way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in some ways, your has your curiosity brought you pleasure, satisfaction, contentment, like in your journeys of exploration, has it brought you to places that you like?
It has, yes.
Right.
It
Okay. Because I was thinking about something like curiosity. Curiosity can be the kind of thing that can get us into trouble, right? I mean, like parents like to tell their children, curiosity kill the cat, right? Because you're
has.
snooping around, you're looking through keyholes. But your curiosity is not that way. It is not getting you into trouble.
Yes, I would say it does. It hasn't caused me, let's say, trouble directly. My only concern is that while I spend so much doing this, maybe I miss out on other things because this is my main.
Ah,
So that it could be some negative, problematic side effect that I'm
right, right,
thinking about.
right. You know that the what you mentioned, the concern or the worry that you might be missing out on something else. This, we might call it sort of a perhaps an anxiety over the not taken decision or the unchosen path, or like we say, the fork not taken, right? Life is a series of choices and forks, and very often. So one way to put it is that as you traverse life, you come to choices and forks, right? And your desire to learn, your desire to understand has a significant bearing on which forks you are choosing or have chosen over a period of time, right? So
Yeah.
now you find yourself at a particular pass, at a particular destination, that when you look back upon your life, you become aware of a certain motivational force that has brought you to where you are. And there is a worry, and I'm going to just use the word anxiety because that is the term that we might use to describe our apprehension, that we might have made the wrong decision, that we might be deluded, because we're uncertain about whether we are doing the right thing or not, right? So one thing that might be going on out here is a kind of anxiety just about the life you are living, about the life that you have chosen to live. And because you have some sense of the life that you might have lived, there is just an anxiety that might be present in your being about the decisions and choices that you have made, right? Does that resonate at all with what you just said to me earlier about the life not lived?
It does, yes. It does
Okay.
resonate with me, yeah.
Mostly that anxiety arises from a consideration of choices and uncertainty about the outcomes of those choices. And in your case, I think what's really interesting is that, as in the way that you're reporting it, this desire to understand, and I'm going to call it maybe this drive to understand, has played a significant role in your life, influencing so many decisions that you might, as you are right now, speculate that given that I've had my life so driven by this particular purpose, what the Greeks used to call telos, right? That you might have what we might call a justified anxiety. What if my life had been driven by some other passion, right? Why do I have this particular passion? Because many others around me don't have the same passion, right? So do you consider yourself to be a bit of an anomaly in this regard? Like, for example, if you were surrounded by similarly curious people, you might say, well, I'm just like everybody else. Is it because you find yourself to be an anomaly that this stands out so much for you?
Ooh, a bit like this, yes.
Right,
So I would say my inclination here would be a bit more excessive than what I generally see around me. Yeah.
right, right. So in the way, once again, that you've described it, you're not experiencing a problem per se that is preventing you from doing what you want to do, that is affecting the quality of your relationships. You're instead reporting to me, and you can correct me if this is off base, you are reporting to me a kind of perplexity about yourself. What, so much of us is unconscious, right? Like my blood clots heal on my own, my nails grow by myself, I don't have to think about my hair growing. These are all physical functions, but even speech processing can be unconscious, right? So in some ways, this is to ask ourselves, who am I? What is this thing that gives rise to these feelings within me? And why am I this way? Right? What are the tentative answers that you have come up with in trying to understand yourself?
Well, I think about what was available to me already when I was a child. Was
Mhm.
books, studying was always there. It was always an option. So, and maybe people I had around me, I had as role models. I could see, okay, they are also doing it. And also I always found it easy. It was never a struggle. So
Ah,
maybe it's also an easy path to take. I don't have to struggle to try to become something else. I can always go down this path because for me
yes,
it's not a problem. It's rather simple and joyful as well in a way.
right. And that's actually a very interesting way of putting it, that there's obviously, we when we inquire into ourselves or into others, we come up with a mixture of this person is that way, they're just constituted that way somehow, right? There's certain switches that are on in your brain, right? This is a kind of some kind of physical reductionist way of thinking about you. The other is that there is something in your environment that made you into who you are, right? Your your parents, you grew up in a house full of books. Um, my daughter's growing up in a house full of books, but she's not necessarily got the reading habit. So there's something in there about the combination of nature and nurture. But you also said something really interesting that this might just be the smoothest path that you see or that you experience through life, which is that of reading, writing, inquiring, and other paths or other trajectories that we might take through the world might be too hard. So we fall into this groove repeatedly,
Yeah.
right? Was there, would you say that this has also been for you a kind of comfort, a kind of help at times through difficult times?
I think so, yes. Yeah, I would say it has. Comfort, yes, because it doesn't require any particular efforts. It's easy to do it, and
Hmm.
when I do it, I know I can do it. I know I'm good at it, so it gives me some kind of self-confidence as well. And
Hmm.
I get something out of it, get some reward from doing it.
Right.
But yeah, it's also easy. So it can be that I do this instead of challenging myself to do something different, which could be maybe good, useful, who knows, but I fall back into this rut, if we call it like that, because it's easy. I don't have
Right,
to think
right.
about what I'm doing.
Now, of course, to describe something as easy within certain cultural frameworks, it can sound prejudicial. It can sound pejorative, right? Oh, it's easy, right? But of course, one reason why something can be easy for us is because we are very good at it, right? We are highly competent at it. And, we know this about certain kinds of skill tasks that there is the difficult approach, there's the gaining of competence, and then as we gain competence, we gain pleasure from the exercise of that competence. And so we do more of it. And of course, when we do more of it, we become better at it. And there's what we might call a virtuous feedback cycle. And this is recommended for everybody when you're playing guitar or long distance running or learning how to write. Just keep doing it, break through the difficulty barrier, and then start to reap the pleasures of the positive feedback cycle. So one thing is clear. You do this because it's easy. You encounter pleasure when you do it. You might be encountering flow states in reading and writing, which make it pleasurable for you, right? So, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of flow states, but the sense of it being effortless and perhaps almost of losing a sense of self when one is reading and writing.
Yeah.
So, do you feel any of that, that when you're reading, writing, inquiring, that there's perhaps a staying in the moment
Uh,
there?
yes, it can happen. Yeah, not all the time, but indeed that aspect is there. Yeah,
That's right.
I can get caught up in it, and for a moment I can forget myself, lose myself, because now I this is the only thing that exists.
Ah, very good. And that's a very pungent phrase when you say to lose myself, to think that this is the only thing that exists. Um, it's something that artists sometimes report when they are working with artworks and they are deeply engaged in modes of attentive working with their artworks, right? So I think the one thing that's worth pointing out from this perspective, when you talk about a loss of self, or you get the feeling that this is the only thing that exists, the piece of writing, there's no attention being paid to the past or the future while one is doing this, right?
Yeah,
One is, to speak colloquially, one is staying in the moment, right?
yeah,
Which is a very common piece of advice that we get from contemplative traditions or mystical traditions. We get this from meditation teachers, right? We get this from mindfulness teachers, all about teaching us to stay in the moment. So, one thing that jumps out from your descriptions of your intellectual explorations is that in your intellectual explorations, you have found, so to speak, a way of staying in the moment. Would you say that's a fair description?
It is, yes. So it's possible to reach that state. It
Yeah,
happens occasionally. It does, yes.
it does, yeah. And of course, staying in the moment, not being concerned about the past, not being concerned about the future, if one was to, and this is an interesting point to think about why contemplative and mystical traditions urge us to seek out the moment. And the answer is quite, I think, elaborate and complex, but there's a couple of threads from that are useful for us. One is that it delivers us from a certain kind of anxiety. To be in the moment is to not be regretful about the past and not anxiously anticipate the future, right? So there might be a subtle seeking out on your part of modes of being that deliver you to anxiety-free states of being. This is where you're anxiety-free, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, when we describe things as being easy, like I said, sometimes to describe something as easy can sound dismissive of ourselves. I'm only doing it because it's easy, right?
Mm.
But maybe if we just turned it around and as you did, I do it because I'm good at it. I do it because I'm good at it and doing it delivers me to flow states. This would be a different description. So perhaps, there might be a judgment in there, right?
Mm.
That I'm just doing this thing that's easy for me,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And of course, in our culture, which prizes this kind of, you must work for it, you must constantly be struggling, this can almost turn into a judgment about ourselves. And maybe I'm lazy because I'm doing things that are easy for me, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important I think, and you can tell me, even if it is easy, there's still a challenge in it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I think this is an interesting, not a paradox, but a kind of irony that we might find something easy even though it's actually difficult. And I don't know how else to put it, but if I was to pick up a book of philosophy off my shelves today, I would say reading it is easy for me, but it's still a difficult book to read. It's challenging, but easy for me, and maybe impossible for others, right?
Mm.
But it's something that I would still seek out. So, does that sound like a fair description of what's going on?
It does, yes. Yeah, and it makes sense when you said what we practice, of course, we get good at. Uh,
That's right.
and yeah, something which is difficult for others can be easy for me. And as well, it resonates what you said in our culture. We're supposed to, embrace new challenges and seek out things which are difficult for us and explore other adventures, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even if we are doing something which is difficult but easy for us, it's yeah, like I say, it can be a judgment of being lazy, maybe.
Yeah. And of course, within that domain that we are competent in, we might be better placed to pick out the appropriate challenges for ourselves. Let me ask you something, Matthias. The second part of the question that I asked you the first time, right? What is it that you're looking for, right? Is to gain an understanding of why you desire to understand. So there's a kind of an interesting, um, box within a box. Here you are
Yeah.
revealing to me through your questions your desire to understand why you desire to understand,
Mm.
right? There's an interesting box within a box picture out here. But let me ask you something. What kind of answer would satisfy you? For example, one answer could be, Matthias, we have subjected your brain to an extensive scan, and we have found that you have 10,000 brain cells that are marked extremely extremely curious person in your brain. So if I was to just tell you that your brain was constituted in such a way that you were curious, that would be one kind of answer. Another kind of answer might be that, look, Matthias, you grew up in a middle class family in a first world industrialized country in socialist Scandinavia. You probably had lots of access to good educational systems. Your family was quite highly educated, I'm guessing. You just had the right environment, right? And so you were almost conditioned to become the Matthias that we know now today. Would either of these answers satisfy you?
Uh, I don't think so. Both, I mean, both of them, especially the second one, really makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
First one, if it could be, proven in some kind of way, yes, okay, I could accept it. But ultimately, would they be satisfying? I don't think so.
Right. So, what kind of understanding do you think you are seeking then?
Well, I don't know. This is also paradoxical. It looks like I'm looking for understanding, but I don't really want to know the answer because then there would be nothing more to look for. So
Mm-hmm.
it would be the end of the journey, and I don't want it to end. So that I look for something, but if I found something, I won't be satisfied with it. I will keep on looking because I want to keep on looking.
Very true.
I cannot say what answer I would be satisfied with. Maybe
Very
no.
good. Right, right. So that's because sometimes that's I think that's a very good way of putting it is to acknowledge that the desire to understand might not always be one that is satisfied, right? And of course, the fact that it cannot be satisfied might be the reason why it lives on within you, right? And so I might be just another one more stop in this long journey of yours, right? To,
Mhm.
uh, the next stop might be some hermit on the top of a mountain who might be able to offer you greater enlightenment. But one question to ask ourselves is whether the question that we are localizing, right, by framing it in the form of why am I curious, whether that question might not be a stand-in for another deeper question, which is to know more about ourselves, who we are, where we've come from, right? So, that question of who am I?
Mhm.
So I wonder if in some sense your question is a kind of, is the particular form that that question has taken in this life of yours, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we might ask ourselves, why have these bad things happened to me? That's to ask a question of, why am I living the life that I'm living? And along with it goes the question of, who am I? Because I look back upon the life that I lived and it gives me some evidence as to who I am, but not complete. So I think one thing that might be worth thinking about is whether this question of whether you desire to understand is an example or an instance, maybe of other deeper questions that lie behind it. And it might also be in this, in this self-referential version that we were describing earlier, that for you to ask this question about yourself is for you to come to realize that your inquiries have now turned upon yourself. That, our inquiries are very frequently just outward driven, right? What's that flower? What's this blue rock? And to go further outwards, right? And perhaps what this is showing is that you have become curious about the seat of all this inquiry, right? Who is it that's asking all these questions? Why does this person who is asking these questions wants to know all these things, right? So I think one thing I would encourage you to think about is what sorts of other questions about your life this might open up for you. There might be perplexities in other areas that you might be confronting that this question could serve as a kind of gateway for you. Because I think asking the question is one thing, but asking ourselves as to what kind of answers we might be looking for is also a useful way of thinking about why we might have asked that question in the first place. So I wonder what you would make of this kind of suggestion that there might be deeper questions at play.
I think that's true. I think it makes sense what you're saying that fundamentally the question is who am I and what life am I leading and is this the life I should lead? Should I lead another life or what
Right.
would my life have been if I didn't go down this path? So yeah, I think this about understanding was. I don't know, fake question or just picking on some detail which could, yeah, hide a deeper question beneath it. I,
Hmm.
I think it makes sense, yes.
Right, right. Because I think all questions are obviously driven by some need and some desire that we have within us. And intellectual desires can serve as covers for emotional desires. I think there's a blend of the two in whatever question we asked ourselves, right? There's a intellectual desire, but there's also an emotional need to know this. So I think that's a very fruitful line of inquiry. I think the fact that you are here asking this question is at least evidence to you that your drive to understand continues unchecked, right? That now you're asking that ultimate meta question, right? Why is it that I want to know? And which is just a
Mm.
question about your knowledge. But I think it's also a way for you to open up other inquiries into yourself. And I would say one last word before we wrap up this discussion. That point you made about that I'm living my life in a particular way and that something is getting unlived, right? That there is a path that I'm not taking. I think it's worth pointing out that that is a very deep and fundamental form of anxiety. It's probably the most fundamental form of anxiety we can have, right? Given our knowledge that we could have done something else. And I don't, and I put it to you in some ways, that's probably not a form of anxiety that we will ever be free from, right? So I think one useful consideration might be to also think about how one could go about living with that anxiety, right? If we reflect on the kind of anxiety, I think we'll come to see that it's not something that's going to go away. So it might be also useful to think about how one could live with the anxiety of the unlived life, right? And and that's something we can talk about, down the line if you want to talk about how one goes about accepting a kind of baseline anxiety that any conscious human being is going to have, right? And so you might be encountering your particular encounter with that anxiety is that your life has brought you to a particular encounter with it, right? So understanding your particular distinctive encounter with anxiety, I think might be an interesting path of inquiry for us as well
Yeah.
when we meet next.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting idea. And I think, yeah, it rings true to me. And I'm also thinking, yeah, there is this anxiety. And then, like we talked about before, I turn to the books, I turn to the inquiry to get out of the anxiety. But in a way, maybe it keeps feeding the anxiety because then I keep reinforcing this path. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
interesting to see how the anxiety could be, yeah, such a big part.
Yes, yes, very much so. Very much so. I think especially when one reflects on the parameters of our existence, right? The fact that we are conscious, the fact that time is finite, that we know that time is finite, that choices are irrevocable, that time only flows in one direction. Once we start reflecting on these existential parameters, I think a certain kind of baseline anxiety just infects us. And part of that is the manifestation in choices. And so I mean, the question you raised today is phrased in a very, is raised, or I would say presented in a quite a powerful philosophical form. Why am I so curious? Right? But I think even that can bottom out into sometimes even more fundamental philosophical questions, such as who am I and what am I doing with this limited parcel of space and time and life that I've been given? Because I think the the question of why this is a problem, right? I mean, fine, you're curious. Why is this a problem for you? Or like lots of people are curious, but the idea that the fact that you find yourself talking about it means that at some level it is a perplexity. And
Yeah,
I think these doors, when opened, can bring us into contact with these kinds of existential issues in this quite direct way. So I think there's at least two avenues forward that strike me as interesting avenues of exploration for us and for you. One is to think about what are the kinds of anxieties you might have about the conduct of your life, because I think these things are related to each other. And I think what other questions you might have about who you are, right? And I think these might have found a particular form in Matthias's life, given the kind of history that Matthias has had. Having had this discussion, right, one hope would be that this is elevated in your consciousness, right? You're thinking about this problem,
Mm.
or you've at least now raised it to the level of something that you are aware of on an ongoing basis. So this might be useful now as you go forward, right?
Yeah.
That when you do seek out lines of inquiry and motivate and engagement, it might also encourage you to think a little bit deeper about what is driving your understanding in these directions. Why these subjects at this time in your life, right? Um, why this particular combination of issues that are your current source of perplexity, because these can become other avenues for learning about yourself,
Mm.
right? Um, I would say, as a middle-aged man now, the things that I'm most interested in learning are the things that I think I would most regret not learning on my deathbed, you know? So there's a sense that time is running out.
Yeah.
I need to learn this. Otherwise, when I'm lying on my deathbed, I'll really regret, why didn't I learn German? I could have read Nietzsche in German, right? So there might be also, you know, there might be also issues lurking there that once examined give us a deeper understanding of ourselves.